Thank you for that. Pardon?
I just want to acknowledge our performers too. We have Destiny Mohammed on the harp. She's going to be with us for this morning, so thank you.
Thank you for that warm invitation. I was talking about, I was sharing this with Stacy Robinson and one of my friends that knew I was coming. And I always tease my friends that live out in California because a lot of times the way we dialogue about ideas, a lot in the black community, we always think about that north-south kind of discussion. And we think of like black folks in California, they're like the people over there, you know, in terms of how they deal with certain concepts. And how they're going to necessarily, like California is its own little country to itself sometimes. One of the things that I want to do first, I guess in a way, as I was telling Lonny, what you all are going to be the first ones to hear today, I'm going to give during my keynote kind of a state of the field of where it is right now that has happened the last 3 years. I'm afraid one of the people in the audience, Rochelle, told me I might have messed up her dissertation in terms of when I shared with her some insights of what's happening, some of the backdrop. The Black Speculative Arts Movement and this second wave of Afrofuturism, as a few of you already know, for a lot of us, it comes out of the Unveiling Visions project that was done in the Schomburg in Harlem a few years ago. And the Schomburg project came out of a conversation between myself and the visual artist John Jennings, who gave his talk yesterday in Southern California, talking about some of these concepts. The trip to, and it was for an event that was hosted by UNESCO, which is the cultural division inside the United Nations, and the Sorbonne. And we put together, in the wake of the year we put it together, I think we were talking about the limitations of the Obama presidency, the rise of the Tea Party, the bombing of Libya, and some other things. And we were saying that, you know what, it makes sense that there needed to be a new intellectual creative movement going on. And we said that amongst ourselves, the two of us, we said, you know, it made more sense to start it in Europe than in the United States in terms of introducing the ideas. And that was because our knowledge of history was Europeans had to tell Americans that jazz was a great art form. You know, and if you do something in Paris, you know, people in New York listen to people in Paris. You know, and so that just speaks to the limitations of American education in terms of how they understand themselves. There are three things I would say that are in terms of the state of the field of Afrofuturism. I want to give the historical background to understand this moment. The three generic concepts to understand where we are, I use the terms future shock, megatrend, and acceleration. Now, future shock, when I say future shock, that was the term that was popularized in the 70s by Alvin Toffler. And for those of you that are Curtis Mayfield fans, know that was also one of his albums, Future Shock, that dealt with returning Vietnam veterans. Right. So when we talk about that age of future shock from the 60s and the 70s, that's where you can make the intellectual argument that some of the seeds for Afrofuturism were sown in the Bay Area when Sun Ra taught at Berkeley, but people always forget about Nathan Hare at San Francisco State in terms of first articulating this need for this relationship between science and black studies. It's also during the era of decolonization and some other black power and so on. And this is what we talk about, this age of future shock, is when the seeds for contemporary Afrofuturism were sown. For San Francisco during that time, or this region, that's also, I remember as a kid, when you had a whole bunch of black folks follow occultists down to Latin America and die, down in there, I think it was in Guyana. Yeah. And it's kind of like, and so we're talking about this spiritual thing of those black folks went down there and died, and now you don't have any more black folks in San Francisco. So during this age of future shock, the seeds are sown. Then during the era of what we call megatrends, which is the late 80s, early 90s, when Barbara Christian writes this article that I always tell people to reference, it was called A Race for Theory. people are trying to figure out or theorize or explain what is happening in the society, because between 1945, 1990, we're locked in that kind of Cold War, East-West versus mentality in terms of how we theorize about certain things. And it's during the late 80s and early 90s, those are when you see the emergence of a new wave of scholars like a Cornel West, talks about prophecy, deliverance. Henry Louis Gates comes out with his work. Molefi Asante's work on Afrocentricity hits the scene. And during this same period of time, this race for theory, that's when the cultural critic Mark Derry interviews Greg Tate and Sam Delaney and Tricia Rose, thinking about what he's observing this black speculative work, and he coins this phrase Afrofuturism. Now, black speculative art, as we kind of talk about it amongst ourselves, have been around for a couple hundred years. And I always say that if you want to talk about its origins, you start in the 19th century at the intersection between anti-slavery rebellions, or some of the metaphysical origins of the Haitian Revolution, which deals with voodoo. People like Martin Delaney, who comes out with probably the first black speculative novel when he talks about the hut, then followed by others in the late 19th century. And those are where you could talk about the intellectual origins of black speculative thought and practice originate, and also with the beginnings of scientific racism in the 19th century. So that's where the seeds of what we think of as black speculative thought in the Western Hemisphere originate. And so you get this mega trend in the late 80s, early 90s of globalization and what you might call first Web 1.0. You know, with the internet really coming into popularity in the mid-90s. And that's where people like Alondra Nelson, Paul Miller, and others form what they call the Afrofuturist listserv. All right, and now that theory, which a lot of people kind of reference to, kind of would hold sway for about a decade. And I remember Paul Miller in a publication several years ago, well, Afrofuturism would collapse because it didn't have a central philosophy. And I would disagree. It collapsed because if you did scholarship on it 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't get a job. Okay? And so that's why the people who would have written a philosophy about it moved away from it. You know, Alondra Nelson and others moved away in terms of what their discipline was, in terms of in other areas at the time. So by the middle of the last decade, there wasn't really that much going on in the field at the time. So then, 05 is where we kind of trace the beginning of what we call this current wave of acceleration. You know, where you had the emergence of social media and how people could exchange ideas and organize online using social media to begin to exchange ideas and other concepts with the emergence of Facebook, and followed by Twitter and some other online social media platforms. And this is where also this forms a matrix where then you have, within several years after that, I remember the conversations I had with Yatasha Womack, who writes the book Afrofuturism. Before we went and after we got back from Paris, she hadn't come out with her book yet, and I wrote a piece based upon our Paris representation, what was called Critical Afrofuturism, which was later published in a book that was co-edited by Francis Gateward and John Jennings, that won an Eisner Award, I believe, at the San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago. And the term 2.0 emerges out of a conversation that at a conference that we had at Emory University a few years back, where during an exchange between myself and Alondra Nelson, who was in attendance, I argued that we're in Afrofuturism 2.0 because of these other concepts and ideas. And I talk about that more at length in the introduction to the book, Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness. And that book, which Lonny's work it appears in, and John does the cover for the art, that emerges at the same time we're putting together Unveiling Visions, which is a result of our trip to Paris. Now, the backstory to that curatorial exhibition was really steeped in a black cultural understanding of the relationship between music, black culture, and in relation to the new technology. We decided to do Unveiling Visions. It was in response to another curated exhibition that had gone on just before ours, and it was called The Shadows Took Shape. And originally, some of the ideas that we were trying to do in Unveiling Visions were supposed to have been in that exhibition. They were not in it. And we did not believe that The Shadows Took Shape was really an Afrofuturistic exhibition. And so we said, you know what, we need to do and pursue and develop our own vision in relation to people who are practitioners and have a deep appreciation of Afrofuturism and Black speculative culture, and put together our own exhibition. And we decided to do it in Harlem at the Schomburg, which is a center for Black research and scholarship. And we did it in the Latimer Room. And so the aesthetics and the way that the exhibition was put together was outstanding. We pulled together close to 90 artists, 20 writers, and a host of other support people to pull the event together. And we've organized it primarily in cyberspace using technology like SketchUp. And we intentionally decided to do it because John and I were classmates at Jackson State. And I said, man, what do you think about Black folks? What kind of parties do they like to have? They like being at juke joints all close up on each other a lot of times. They want that music thumping, and they like a lot of entertainment to go along with the experience. And so that's why, as part of the exhibition, we had the stuff, like as kids, we remember those great album covers of Parliament Funkadelic, or Earth, Wind, and Fire, or great book covers, and other things that would be instantly recognizable to the everyday person who does not necessarily have a deep understanding of it. And my favorite part of the exhibition was the fact that it was public. People didn't have to pay to get in there, whereas all the educators that brought their school kids through the exhibition. And I'll never forget this group of little Black girls, probably I think around 6th grade, coming through the exhibition. I'm just standing back watching. They're talking to each other, and they're like looking at the art, and they're like, one of them were like, yeah, I really love this stuff. And then they were talking about, man, why can't we do it? And so I remember asking them a question. I said, well, which one of you can draw? And the other girl raised her hand, I can draw. Well, I said, well, who's really good at poetry and writing papers and all that? And the other one raised her hand. And then another one said, I said, okay, well, who knows a lot of people to distribute stuff and all this, that, and the other? And another one raised her hand. I said, well, then you have a design team, okay? Because you all can collectively do something like this. And that was what was really great about the exhibition, is having New York school kids going through there and seeing themselves reflected in the art. And even the people in Harlem at the time were shocked, because I guess it had fallen out of popularity to have a totally Black art exhibition where all the art is Black, is situated in the future, and the people, I mean, because a lot of Afrofuturism, and John and I had said it privately, was responsible to the nonsense of this idea of post-Blackness. And we would say, man, when did we stop being Black? You know, I didn't get that memo. And so it was it's what John coined in our conversation, we were being Black on purpose. You know, when we put the event together for Unveiling Visions. And then following Unveiling Visions, because it lasted 90 days, tens of thousands of people had seen it, I wrote a manifesto that was later published at the invitation of some friends that were Afrofuturists in England. It was posted right at the end of the exhibition, where I talk about Afrofuturism and a manifesto for the Black Arts Movement that was published online with Medium. And then I later wrote a more extensive version that was published in Obsidian, and in the book that Rashawn Perry of Cedar Groves was gracious enough to publish, Cosmic Underground. That book she's selling in the back has the writings of the movement in it for Cosmic Underground that came out of the Unveiling Visions exhibition. So strongly encourage you to buy it. It's probably indispensable for people that are into scholarship. Plus it has a lot of beautiful art into it, with a great book cover designed by Stacy Robinson. So, and we talked about the other difference with the 2.0 exhibition in terms of why we're in the 2.0 era. There are 5 elements that we talk about that were not present in the earlier wave, where we say you got to have metaphysics, aesthetics, theoretical and applied science, social science, and programmatic space. Because one of the things I argue, and I mentioned to Rachel Spencer earlier, being an Afrofuturist does not, I always reference it in terms of certain material facts. You know, it's nice to imagine about the future, but there is still a material reality that has to be attended to, which is what I like about Lonny's work in terms of future studies. And what we're doing with Afrofuturism sometimes parallels future studies, but is grounded in the Africana experience. One of the things I always say, if there's no Africa in your futurism, you're not doing Afrofuturism, you're doing somebody else's futurism, which is why in the book Afrofuturism 2.0, I call attention to the Black Studies origins of it with Nathan Hare and the Black Studies movement. So to me, I'm bringing it back home to where the academic intellectual roots of it begins. And now I'm going to share with you, you all will be the first to hear, this is coming out of the Utopia Journal, which is giving an overview of where the movement is right now, that I'm co-editing with Dr. Tobias Van Veen, where it's a cultural studies journal for Utopia. It's published at the end of August, so I guess I'm adding more stuff that Rochelle, you have to put into your lit review for your dissertation, so it'll be out in a couple months. Though the popular connection between the Black speculative arts and radical Black politics has emerged in the wake of anti-Black police brutality in Canada, and the United States, it would be amiss to see it solely as a reaction to prevailing conditions of white fragility. Contemporary Black speculative arts and Black political movement express decades of formative political and radical imaginaries, coalescing in a number of social movements, aesthetic expressions, media arts, music, and literature, that they themselves and across their local, national, but global connections reiterate a legacy of invention, celebration, and struggle. And we put that in there because there are people that used to argue with me that this was not a Pan-African movement, but man, I really like being right in public, and those naysayers have been silenced. You know, so, as mentioned above, we see race as necessary to critique the formation and history of the political and its futures. And we talk about the contributions of people like Du Bois, Amilcar Cabral, Frantz Fanon, Sylvia Wynter, and others. The point is that race matters when facing the impossibility of the futures to come. And we reiterate this crucial argument alongside Reynaldo Walcott, who posits the ethno-political to demarcate how in the post-9/11 state, identity has reemerged as a function of the state, to mark, contain, surveil, and incarcerate in a fashion that requires a serious re-engagement of identity. And all we're doing is really saying in public what a lot of people have known what is the driving force in global politics now for several years, and that's the reemergence of nationalism. All right, the leader of Japan is a nationalist, the leader of China is a nationalist, the leader of England is a nationalist, and the leader of Russia, the United States is for all purposes, he's a nationalist, and so forth. So this event has caught a lot of my colleagues flat-footed in the academy because a lot of them that are now tenured or they're gatekeepers in higher ed and other positions build their careers on trying to promote diversity. Okay? But the driving force for the next couple generations is in fact nationalism. And that's upsetting to a lot of people. But Foreign Affairs, the Council of Foreign Relations now are trying to figure out what to do about this. Because what has actually happened since the 1960s, we're more segregated now than we were in 1965, okay? And when they talk about a disaggregation of peoples, you're seeing the reaction all around the world in relation to immigration and a host of other issues across resources. And that's why my argument and critique of people that promote a lot of diversity or whatever, I'm saying, look, and I said, and Lonny heard me say this in Con, there are a finite amount of resources left in terms of water and resources that even influence our technology. There's a change in demographics across borders, and there are a host of changes and trends that are going to drive everything for the next 20 years, including the acceleration of technology. And a lot of what we even talk about in the classroom is more of a reflection of the desires of what they wanted in the 19th century rather than the facts of what's happening right now. And so even the left is guilty of not dealing with certain material facts when it comes to how history works. If I would say, if the right-wing people are guilty of trickle-down economics, the left is guilty of trickle-down ideology. And too often they always want the people in the community to serve the interests of an ideology rather than the ideology serving the interests of the people, okay? And that's where even in the left, the so-called left or so-called progressives, when they get angry at some of these communities that don't have the time or the educational resources to tie into what they're doing, they get frustrated and they'll make stupid comments about the so-called unwashed masses not serving the interest of so-called progressives. With films such as Get Out and Black Panther attaining worldwide acclaim, Afrofuturism has become something of a buzzword in global pop culture. Taking on a sense of cultural capital and cachet as a general term, it expresses the speculative utopias and futurist themes of Black science fiction, circulating in interviews, articles, and sound bites surrounding Hollywood films, celebrity artists and musicians, superhero franchises, and comics. Yet its meaning is often limited in various ways. On the one channel, Afrofuturism is often described as an inventory of Black futurist aesthetics, androids, cyborgs, Black superheroes, and alien motifs, with little thought as how its aesthetic symbols and their hybrid identities potentially question underlying paradigms of race, identity, and cultural assumptions concerning Blackness. On the other channel, Afrofuturism is viewed as a futurist extension of Afrocentricity. Scholarship frequently demonstrates tendencies and tensions between those polarities. The emergence of the Black speculative art in this perspective, we're recognizing that Afrofuturism names a field far vaster than its successive attempts at definition. By the second decade of the 21st century, scholarship began returning to Afrofuturism to rethink the relationship of Blackness to technology, identity, and utopia, while contemporary artists such as Janelle Monáe, Killer Priest, and Jeff Mills explored its tropes in an increasingly racialized technoculture. As I previously mentioned, Natasha Womack's book that came out 3 or 4 years ago, Afrofuturism, is a part of this wave. Also, for Womack, Afrofuturism is an intersection of imagination, technology, and the future and liberation that redefines a lot of these notions. Then scholars like Lisa Yazzik expanded the literary scope, but I always talk about the mother of what we kind of say the mother of the Black speculative art movement is really based upon the work of Cherie Renee Thomas in her book Dark Matters, when she was doing all this work by herself in the 90s, going to the Schomburg and talking to some of the people that were very formative in this when she put together her book Dark Matters by herself, doing the research by herself. And that's why you're talking about the emergence of Black speculative arts movement. It really starts with the work of Cherie Renee Thomas and her book Dark Matters, and then work she did on the early decade of the last decade. Reynaldo Anderson suggests that the second wave of Black futurity is influenced by a number of factors, which I previously talked about. During an exchange between he and Alondra Nelson at the Alien Bodies Conference in 2014, that's where the 2.0 was coined and Afrofuturism 2.0 was redefined. And in their definition of it, Anderson and Charles, we call upon what we call astro-blackness, which is a term that was defined at the astro-blackness meetings at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, when one of our guests here, is Jennifer here? I don't see her. Jennifer Williams was there, and she was a graduate student. And when we coined the definition for astro-blackness in terms of taking on this global perspective, and that was done by Andrew Rollins, who's also in the 2.0 book. And we talk about the emergence of Black identity framework within global technocultural assemblages, and it's a global response to the planetary challenges facing Black life in the 21st century. And this redefinition signaled a shift to thinking about it through a global perspective of technocultural systems that oppress as well as communicate different notions of Blackness. By rethinking it in these intersecting fields, as I noted earlier, it's responsive to globalization, but anticipating many of its developments. And this is, and I bring out this point is because a lot of too many of my friends think just by reading 2 or 3 science fiction novels, that's going to bring you on point. Okay? No, you got to know. This is a transdisciplinary perspective. That means you not only got to read. I like Octavia Butler and some of the other writers, but you need to look at some of the stuff related to political science and some of the ideas related to anthropology and so forth. because some of what they were writing about, people did not necessarily anticipate every single thing related to what's going to probably happen to us over the next decade or two. We also write about it's the beginning and a move away from the Eurocentric perspective of the 20th century's early formulation. And this is where I had to kind of, I know I upset some people a couple of years ago when I talk about, I can write about Afrofuturism and not cite a single European scholar for it to make sense. And this was based upon the recognition I was tired of going to conferences where I attended one in Norrköping, Sweden, and the panel purported to represent talking about black women's bodies and using feminism. Now, I can appreciate feminism as an analytical construct, but if you're going to talk about black women and you don't cite a single black feminist scholar, that's ridiculous. I'm like, look, I ain't hear no Bell Hooks, I ain't hear no Patricia Hill Collins, and that's the old school stuff. And they spent the whole panel talking about black women's experiences, and these women on the panel, none of them were black, are going to be getting tenure and all these other kinds of places at institutions of higher education. So I kind of call phooey on that, and that's why I kind of get in trouble sometimes for speaking my mind, but you know, I'm tenured, I'm an associate professor, and I don't care. So, and so, so that's why along the way now, there's, as I talked informally with some of our guests here in the back, there's got to be ethics involved with this. People still got to tell the truth. I know it's become popular now to be entertained by this stuff, but there are people that still have to be recognized along the way. One of the, as I mentioned here in the intro, the origins of the Black Speculative Arts Movement go back in planning the exhibition Unveiling Visions when we put this together in Harlem. However, where the first big successful international meeting we had and where it's really running strong now is in Canada, where Quentin Versetti, who as a graduate student now is leading a very strong Afro-Caribbean take on what Afrofuturism looks like in Canada. And we're going to be doing an exhibition in Berlin because as Dr. Natasha Kelly talks about in Berlin, said, no, you African Americans, you are not leaving us behind. We want to get down with this. And we're planning, we're in the early stages of planning an event down there in South Africa, which I know, I talked about that the future of Afrofuturism long term was going to be in Africa. You know, and I parallel this argument with talking about how the ideas of Pan-Africanism start in the African diaspora with people like Du Bois and I can't remember Sylvester's last name, that really are driving forces in the first several Pan-African Congresses before they're then taken over by Kwame Nkrumah and the Africans themselves, because the Africans themselves will have the power to institutionalize a lot of the ideas we're talking about. And so now that's circulating over there on the continent, and also this idea of language in terms of how certain concepts are communicated, because the argument can be made that the dominant perspective is taking place in the black English-speaking world, and the other linguistic formations are catching up. For example, French in France, because they're not normally supportive of black cultural projects that the black French want to do themselves, they're now, they're strongly participating in this. And the thing that's happening now in Europe is the black cultural creators in Europe who want to get involved with Afrofuturism are having their work institutionally co-opted by white European scholars that, for political reasons. So the black Europeans, in an attempt to get their own voices out, have to fight some of their own countrymen, and that's why they tend to be working with us. And I can't wait to get over to Germany and talk bad about some people when I get to Germany over there. And so, and I don't have a problem with that. That's why when we went to Europe, Lonny, I don't normally bite my tongue. The first time I was really badly racially profiled was in Germany when I was building this stuff, because what's happening to black people in Europe now, whether you're Muslim or Christian or whatever, they're getting harassed in Germany and in Italy and other European countries over there also. As we were informed in Cannes, I really like how black women just take control of the situation. We're getting ready to have a meeting, and because one of the service workers came up, who was a Muslim brother, came up and said, I guess he saw what we were doing, he ran and told his sister. And his sister, he's a Muslim, she's a Muslim, and she came up in all her regalia into the meeting and said, "I want to speak." And so my sister, we gave her a seat on the stage, and she spoke her truth in terms of what's happening with black Muslims in France. And while we were over there, I got a chance to meet Aissa Maiga, who was kind of like, you could say, the Angela Bassett of French film, talking about how black women are mistreated in French film. And they had their own kind of black woman Me Too movement over there on the red carpet over there, and they had a book coming out dealing with this topic. And so that's why I always tell brothers and sisters, man, Europe is not your friend either. The African American is just the highest on the racial hierarchy, followed by the Afro-Caribbeans, the Africans, and at the bottom, African Muslims in terms over there. And I have no problem putting Europeans in their place when it's called for. And that's where sometimes we got to use our American cultural cachet to check them when we see them mistreating other people. Because I had to check some Germans when they racially profiled me, because I had to tell them, I'd share with them, look, man, we beat y'all down twice in 2 world wars. This is my passport, and I'm not going to be treated like this. And then I had to address this when I got to the conference there in Bavaria, saying, because the people attending the conference saw me get put up against the wall with the other immigrants until I showed them my passport. And I was kind of rude. I took my passport and put it right in the guy's face, because he had lined up all the North African people and blacks against the wall, this undercover police officer. And I had to tell them about themselves. I'm like, no, y'all just like y'all grandparents. Y'all watch your neighbors get carted away and you didn't say nothing. So, and it's time for us to stop going to France and saying, oh, this is such a great vacation, whatever. Because in some of these suburbs and places out of sight of the tourists, they're mistreating our people very badly. And it's time to speak to that. And so, in the interest of time, I want to stop right there, and I want to thank you all for an invitation.